guys, Colebello here and welcome back to the video. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make slanted and curved walls in bloxburg. This build hack is super simple to do, and yet it's the perfect way to make your exteriors look more interesting, especially if you're making a modern house like this one. So if you end up using it, make sure to like the video and let's get into it. So I'm going to start off by making these slanted walls. Now there's two ways you can go about doing this. The slant can either be facing away from the building or angled in towards the building. If you're doing it the first way, you're going to want to start by delineating the wall that you're slanting, and then this is probably self-explanatory, but you're going to want to use a basic shape to create the wall. So you're just going to resize this as wide as it goes and then pretty high up, and then using the transform tool you're going to want to rotate this by 15 degrees, which when going this way is going to be 345 degrees, and then you're going to transform this to match the front and bottom edges to this front wall. Once it looks like that, you can adjust the height of this to make it match up to the top of this wall, and then you can use basic shapes to create a roof that matches the width of this perfectly. Now I would obviously make this thicker if it was an actual house to make it look more interesting, but this kind of gets the point across. And then you can patch this up with a horizontal wedge to make it a flat wall. But if you want to make it into a window, which I would recommend to make it feel more open, you can just slate this wall and then make the front window out of transparent cubes. So just make this a width of 0.5, resize it to the widest and then all the way up. And then just keep in mind that if you have to use multiple, the seam is going to be visible, so you want to make the seam between the two shapes kind of centered, and then you can cover up those seams with mullions to make it look more natural. So with that in mind, I'm actually going to take this down to a width of 10. And then place another one here so that the line is in the center. Now I'm going to take a transparent horizontal wedge to fill in this triangular gap here. Now that this is all patched up, you can just leave it like this if you're fine with these lines, but I would recommend taking a cube and adding like little lines to the center as decoration. You can just do the thinnest width and then like 0.7 long, just something like this that covers up that gap and makes it look more natural. And obviously if you add more of these going vertically and also around all the edges, it'll look more like an intentional choice, but that's kind of the most basic form of a slanted wall with no curves added. But now I'm going to show you an example of a slanted wall that curves inwards to connect to the roof. In particular, I'm going to be recreating this section of my most recent build. So this is essentially the room that I had. Now I'm going to be slanting this wall, but I'm going to keep this interior wall for the inside, because if you're slanting a wall inwards, you really don't want it to be visible on the interior, because then it just creates an awkward space underneath where you can't really put anything. So I'm just going to leave that there, and then I'm going to resize a cube to start making the exterior wall. I'm just going to keep the original width of the cube, and then I'm going to make this really tall and really wide. Now I'm going to line it up to about this far away from the front wall, and then again I'm going to rotate this to 345, which is 15 degrees inwards. And then I'm just going to leave this off to the side for a moment until I can connect the roof to the wall. Now to create the roof, I'm going to start by placing a floor on the top of this to create a ceiling for the inside. And then I'm going to make another cube, which is the same width as this, and make it really big. And I can worry about the rest of it later, but right now I'm going to focus on this edge that's going to connect to the wall. I'm going to first line the front of this up to where the slanted wall is, and then I'm going to line this side edge up with the side wall right here. Now to create the illusion of a curve, I'm going to use a series of straight sections that angle down more and more until they line up with this slanted wall. So I'm going to start by copying this and then changing the width to 1.2. Now you can experiment with different widths, but just know that the wider you get, the longer the curve is going to be. But you don't want to go too wide, because then it's going to be obvious that it's straight sections instead of a continuous curve. So I'm going to use transform to angle this downwards by 15 degrees. And then line up this edge with this edge. Once it's lined up perfectly, you can copy this and repeat, and if you're doing 15 degrees, you should only need 4 to complete this. Another tip is that if you place this one on top of this, you can copy them so you can transform it less time. Now if you're doing this on the first floor, you can just connect this to the ground and leave it like that. But because this example is on the second floor, I'm going to make this fully wrap around so that there's a curve down here too. Then that line will continue all the way down here and just make everything look more smooth and connected. So all you have to do is make a thinner version of this that lines up with the front. And then you can place this wherever you want it down here. But if you're gonna have like a front door under this, I would recommend lining the top of this up to the door, kind of like this, just so that everything looks really nice. And then because this is a similar process, I'm just gonna speed it up so you can follow along, but don't worry about connecting it to this just yet. Now it should look something like this, and the hard part is going to be lining these two pieces up. So I would just start by lining up the top edge of this here. And then you can transform this over to line up this corner with the outside edge of this piece. And then you can move this up so that these edges align perfectly. And then finally resize this down so that the height perfectly lines up. And just like that, you have a curvy exterior wall. Then you can use more basic shapes to extend this roof outwards, which I will do a time lapse of right now. Now another cool thing you can do with these roofs is round off the edges, which is as simple as taking a vertical cylinder and then literally just keep the original dimensions and transform this into place. You want basically the center of this cylinder to perfectly line up with this edge. But once it looks seamless like that, you can take another cube to extend this edge out. And besides this part back here, it should look something like this. And you can obviously do it down here too, but you get the point. Now all that's left to do is patch up this hole right here, which you can honestly just use a bunch of cubes for. I literally almost did that with like one cube. There's just this tiny hole to patch up. And now all that's left to do is add windows. Now just as a bonus tip, you'll notice that I added this pattern to the outside of the windows in the original build. And the reason that I did that is because when I added the windows in like this, I noticed that they kind of seemed really out of place, especially with this curve right here. And obviously if you're keeping this interior wall straight, there's no real way to make a window that matches the shape. And so what I did was I ended up using a bunch of resized cubes and basically scattering them randomly across the windows, and then intentionally covering up any gaps in the windows. And then when I got here, I just made them really close together like this. And so you can really make any pattern you want, but what that does is it kind of blurs the lines between the windows, and it just makes it a lot less harsh, which I personally prefer. That's pretty much it. As you can see on the finished result, the curve looks really good from afar, and you can't even really tell that it's a bunch of straight lines unless you're looking really closely. And here's another example on the back of the house with all of these slanted walls. And also keep in mind that this does not have to be limited to the exterior. Here in the kitchen, I use this hack to create an island that basically curves into the floor, which looks really unique. I also curved some of the interior walls on the bedroom to kind of mimic the exterior, and this desk right here. So there really are lots of ways you can use this, and it's still pretty simple to do. So that is going to be it for this video. If you enjoyed it, consider subscribing. 90% of the people that watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would really appreciate the support. As always, comment down below if you have any video ideas or build suggestions, and make sure to follow my Instagram and TikTok for more behind the scenes content and build hacks. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!